Good afternoon. Welcome everybody to a video I have going on today with Lieutenant General Bruce Crawford, the CIO G6 of the Army. I am Billy Mitchell, Editor-in-Chief of FedScoop, and it is my immense pleasure to chat with Lieutenant General Crawford today in the middle of a pandemic. Unfortunately, we can't do this in person, but unfortunately, you have a great team behind you that has made it possible to use Skype and Microsoft Teams to chat today. So. Welcome, and I hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining us today.
All right, Billy, thank you for having us. Really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you.
Great. Well, obviously, the pressing topic, we're still in the middle of a pandemic, and everybody's still trying to figure out what the next steps are as COVID-19 stretches on. And I know that the Army has been doing a lot to continue operations amidst this pandemic. Things have been a little different. So I'd love to hear from you about how your office's operations and mission may have shifted and how the Army's been impacted by COVID-19. So how has IT played a critical role in continuing the mission of the U.S. Army?
Well, I mean, that's obviously a great question. It's also the question of the day, and the one as I plug in and out of social media and keep track of things that's on everyone's mind. The first thing I'll tell you is I'll try and start at the 30,000 foot level and go from there. I would tell you that myself and Lieutenant General Steve Fogarty, the operational commander in cyberspace, and he's the commander of Army Cyber, our focus on this has been essentially that everything that we do with respect to technology, whether it's having expanded the network by 400% in terms of capacity over the last 90 days, or another subject we'll talk about a little later with respect to the rapid working with the DoD CIO as a part of the task force and being able to rapidly do something that probably would have taken us a year to do in about 90 days, and that's rolling out an enterprise collaboration tool. Everything that we are doing and everything that we're planning to do actually has to do with a focus area of the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army, and a task that they've given me, and that's how do we leverage technology to move the Army from the industrial age to the information age. With the big outcome being, if you think, okay, what's the in order to? What's the operational outcome of this leveraging the ability to leverage technology to move from the industrial age to the information age? It's all about posturing the Army to leverage data as a strategic asset. So whether you're here in the Pentagon or you're out at the tip of the spear in the field, it's about how are we going to posture the Army to leverage data so that we are able to orient, we're able to decide, and we're able to act faster than peer adversaries. And that spans pretty much every warfighting function, from fires to how we view our ability to push logistics. And so that's kind of the focus of all things information technology, and virtually, everything that we do with respect to modernizing our networks. And so I'll just kind of start there. So to your question about how has the mission shifted, one thing that happened relatively early on was, and hats off to our Army leadership, but they quickly recognized the enormity of the COVID-19 crisis. And so in a COVID environment, I think we did two things really well early on. One is we innovated. And then the second, and of course, you got to create an environment, a culture that's focused on innovation. So that happened. And then the second thing was we were able to rapidly adapt. And there are a couple of real world examples of how that occurred. Probably the one that's most interesting to me is what happened in Training and Doctrine Command. And so, as you know, this is the academic, the institutional part of the Army where we conduct training and where we conduct all of our recruiting efforts, among a couple of other things. So what Training and Doctrine Command was able to do rapidly, I mean, this started to happen within the first couple of weeks, and then it just hit speed at about the 30-day mark, is think about 5,000 classrooms, 8 different centers of excellence. As you know, we train our soldiers. If you're a signaler or you're a cyber warrior, you're at Fort Gordon. If you're in the fires community, you're at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Another example, if you're in the intel community, you're out at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, or if you're in the maneuver business, you're at Fort Benning. 5,000, actually 5,100 different classrooms, 8 different centers of excellence at 14 different locations, and 33 total schools. They were able to rapidly transition from an in-person training and in-person recruiting to be able to tap into the virtual world and the virtual capabilities that myself and General Fogarty rolled out to rapidly pivot to leveraging online training to continue the mission. All right, and so what does that really mean? Is they were able to leverage the enterprise network rapidly, and as I said, to quickly innovate and to quickly adapt. And they have not missed a beat. If you listen to the TRADOC commander, General Paul Funk, he talks about it in a context of, instead of bringing soldiers to the training, we want to leverage the enterprise network and leverage technological advancements in IT to be able to bring training to the soldier. And that's essentially where they sit right now, and they're operating at full capacity. So that's one example of the Army's ability to rapidly innovate and to adapt. The other one, so you probably read a lot about the medical community and the different roles and missions that they've been playing, supporting Army North as the Joint Force Land Component Commander here in the continental United States. An interesting data point is that the medical community right now today, about 50% of their patient engagements are being done virtually. And so those are just two. There are many other examples of how the Army was able to rapidly innovate and then adapt to the changing environment. And again, there are many more, but those are just two that come immediately to mind. If I had to kind of put a bow on that conversation, back to your question, I think the COVID-19 environment actually created some opportunities to accelerate some of the ideas that we had and to rapidly accelerate the rollout of capabilities. And we can talk a little bit about some of those throughout the conversation.
Sure. And that's a great point to pivot to the next question that I had, in that silver lining, or those opportunities that come out of this otherwise poor situation, is that acceleration, and probably meaning that you can do some things that are going to have some long-term impacts that will stick around, or you'll have some lessons learned, or for if for nothing else, it shows that modernization and the network are at an all-time importance, because there may be a time down the road when you need to move into telework or things like that, or depend on IT to support mission continuity. So what are your thoughts when I pose that question to you on the long term? Maybe.
Yeah. What's interesting is, as you well know, and I'm pretty sure every day you have a conversation about this, the new normal. I mean, it's the only time I'll use air quotes today, but the new normal. And there's lots of really good discussions and dialogues and narratives that are starting to emerge. But when I think about the whole new normal discussion, I think it's less a new normal, and it's probably more likely to be a new now. And here's my premise. Just as the last 90 days were different than anything that we've ever done, I believe, and this is my opinion, okay, that the next 90 days will be dependent on one of two potential outcomes and changes in behavior. So there's one school of thought that says that we'll, do the old behaviors and norms return, essentially the way we were doing it. We just want to do more of that. Or the second potential outcome from an environment perspective is that based on what we learned, do new behaviors actually emerge? My instincts, my grandfather always used to tell me, trust your instincts. If you have them, first get instincts and then trust them. But My sense is it's more of the latter, vice the former, that there are going to be some behaviors. There are going to be some lessons that we've learned throughout this process that I think will be a part of, whether you're going to call it the new normal or the new now in the near future. And so there are a couple of, so there are many lessons learned, but there are a couple that I think probably carry a little bit more weight than others in terms of what I've watched. As I said before, both as a part of Mr. Honorable Danny Deasy's task force, where he early on pulled all the CIOs together. And literally, I believe for the first 6 weeks, we met every day for 3 hours. We didn't meet on weekends, but we were preparing for the next week. But we met literally every day with him. All the CIOs did from all the different services, along with Cybercom and NSA, for 3 hours as a part of that task force. And I think you may have seen some of the things that he said about that. But at the top of that list was collaboration tools and the need for an enterprise collaboration tool. And essentially, that's voice. It's video, it's the ability to share files and share screens. It's the ability to essentially collaborate. And it's not just from here in the Pentagon, it's from wherever it is that you happen to be. And so the first big lesson is that it's the need for an enterprise collaboration tool. So we have a variety of enterprise collaboration tools, but the one that we put the most emphasis on, it's called Commercial Virtual Remote, and it's a modified version of Microsoft Teams. It allows you to talk, up to controlled unclassified information, or what used to be called FOUO, from wherever you happen to be. And oh, by the way, it works from either your personal device or from your government device. So imagine the power of that. So you've got the enterprise piece, which is from here in the Pentagon. I can spin up a video session. As a matter of fact, every day we do our 0900 conference call via video. So there's everything from that. But imagine you're a young company commander, a young captain out there in the field, and you supervise, let's say, anywhere from 100 to 200 soldiers. You now have the ability from your personal device to spin up your training meeting. That's something you do like once or twice a week. Your maintenance meeting, or more importantly, in this COVID environment, you and your senior enlisted advisor get to look in the eyes of a soldier. One of the big takeaways for me, back to the importance of collaboration tools, and it's not just voice, but it's video and it's chat. There is no substitute for the ability to look in the eyes of those you lead. So back to that first lesson learned, I think it was the importance of an enterprise secure unclassified collaboration tool that allows you to access it from wherever it is that you happen to be, whether you're using a government device or a personal device. And I'll stop there to see if you had any comments or questions on that.
No, that sounds great, and I totally agree. As me doing my job, trying to talk to people such as yourself, it's super important to actually be able to look you in the face and have an actual human conversation. So I appreciate that comment completely. But continue on. What other lessons do you have learned or impacts?
So the second lesson learned, again, there are many, had to do with cybersecurity. Now think about how quickly we expanded the cyber attack surface that we had to defend. So we went from a perimeter that is, you're probably on a post-camping station, you're directly connected to the defense network, in this particular case the Army's network. Think about how rapidly, almost overnight, that went from defending that attack surface, which we've been planning to defend for a very, very long time. And I think we do that as good as anybody in the world. We've got world-class network defenders. But being able to quickly pivot to having to defend an attack surface that exists in someone's living room or in their office or wherever they happen to be. And so that happened, I won't say it happened overnight, and a whole lot of work went into it. Again, not just working inside the Army, but working with our joint partners. But having the flexibility to be able to expand that quickly was a big lesson learned, and another I won't call it a tactic, technique, or procedure, but I'll call it something that will endure in the future.
Yeah.
And then the third thing actually has to do with something I mentioned a little bit earlier. I mentioned the fact that we had over a 400% increase in capacity in about 30 days. I mentioned my closest partner, Lieutenant General Steve Fogarty. So he's responsible for operating and defending the network. But he and his team, working with us here in the Pentagon, came up with the ability to rapidly scale the capacity to allow commercial virtual remote or WebEx for Gov and some of the other, I talked about what TRADOC was able to do, Training and Doctrine Command was able to do, where they were literally almost overnight able to pivot to bring training to the soldier or able to leverage the enterprise network in order to keep recruiting going. At the pace that it had been going. So those are three big lessons learned for me. And again, there are many others that we could talk about all day, but the big ones are the demand for an enterprise collaboration tool for the reasons that I talked about, our ability to rapidly extend the capacity to be able to defend regardless of where the user happened to be, this expanded attack surface that I talked about, and then scaling the network rapidly in terms of capacity were three big lessons, and those will definitely endure because if I closed out this particular question, our workforce at Echelon, regardless of whether you're at the tip of the spear or you're at the senior level here at the corporate headquarters in the Pentagon, there's been an awareness so they were obviously aware of technology before, but the ability to rapidly apply that technology. I mean, who knew, 4 months ago or 3.5 months ago, the power of a capability like Teams or a capability like WebEx or some of the other collaboration tools. Now we knew, but institutionally, I don't know that we were aware. So there's been an increased awareness to the point to where we've got almost 300,000 active users on CV, or commercial virtual remote Microsoft Teams right now. And my projection is that in the next 30 days, we'll be close to, or we will exceed over 400,000 active users. At some point, you got to look at the Army and say, wow, as the largest service, the Army potentially could be the biggest user of this particular capability globally.
Wow.
If you look at just one single organization.
Yeah. That's amazing. It's really cool to see how you move to that and to hear that trajectory. So I also want to spend some time with you while I have you talking about, all these other things you were doing pre-COVID. You guys were busy before it, and I'm sure in way more busy now, but you've been doing some really cool stuff in the cloud and with enterprise IT as a service. So I want to pivot a little bit and maybe, those things that you've done in those areas kind of led to some of the successes you've had during this time. But let's start with the enterprise cloud program management office that you've set up recently. I know you recently named a director and that's starting to get operational, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about it and what we can expect to see in the future once things kind of maybe get back to operational norm after COVID, if that is to ever happen. But yeah, tell me what's going on there.
Yeah, it goes back to the whole new normal discussion. Yeah. So absolutely, we started this journey about a year ago, and early on, one of the things that I figured out and thought through and consulted with others is that we needed to centralize the oversight of all things cloud throughout the 1.4 million person Army. And these are lessons learned from market research that we've done on a variety of different organizations, from Airbnb to Netflix, et cetera. But centralizing the oversight of cloud and then hiring the talent from industry. We got a whole lot of really talented people throughout the Army, but one decision that we made early on is we wanted to go out to commercial industry and bring in the talent into this organization. So the new director, we brought him on just before Thanksgiving. His name is Mr. Paul Puckett. He came from a company, he was an executive with a company called Pivotal, and had spent a lot of his time, both inside the government and outside the government, shepherding migrations to the cloud. And so bringing Paul in was a big win for the Army. So what's the big idea associated with standing up an enterprise cloud management office beyond the fact that we needed to centralize oversight? If you go back to October, you heard our Secretary of the Army make a declarative statement. And he said that at our annual AUSA conference, he said that access to data in the cloud was essential to every Army priority. At that time, it was whether it's people, or its readiness, or its modernization or reform, which were the stated priorities for the Army, that access to data in a cloud hosting environment was essential to all of those modernization priorities. So COVID, in the stand-up, back to your question, the stand-up of the Enterprise Cloud Management Office, it provided an opportunity to actually accelerate, because there was some concern that, wait a minute, is this going to short circuit the stand up of the Enterprise Cloud Management Office? Joe Crawford, you told us in November that by March, you're going to have this stood up and it's going to be ready to go. It actually accelerated and provided an opportunity to accelerate the stand up of Paul Puckett's organization. One thing I'll tell you, if you were here and we were having a conversation just yesterday about cloud and about the stand up of his organization, because it's essentially a startup. If you think about it, the equivalent of a startup right here inside the Army as both a reform and a modernization effort. One of the comments that he made, he said, the Enterprise Cloud Management Office is a team of innovators and early adopters, setting conditions to scale cloud-enabled outcomes to the Army. And that's a pretty bold statement, but I don't think truer words have ever been spoken in terms of the vision and my thinking of the rationale for standing up such an office. So to your question, it's stood up. It obviously doesn't have all of the people that it needs because COVID did impact because of stop, move, et cetera, weren't able to get all the people. But what he did is he pivoted back to the point of being able to leverage the virtual environment. He pivoted so I don't have the people physically sitting here, but I have access to the talent that I need. Mm-hmm. And so you couple that with this opportunity I talked about when it came to the COVID environment and the opportunity it presented us with. He is up and he is fully operational. As a matter of fact, I talked about commercial virtual remote / Microsoft Teams and where the Army is. That operation from an Army perspective was orchestrated by the Enterprise Cloud Management Office, given the cloud dependencies of a tool like Microsoft Teams. And so I feel pretty good about where they are in terms of the stand-up and how operationally focused that they are as an organization. So you may have heard me say this before, but cloud as a capability is a means to an end and not the end itself. And a good example of that is the role that cloud enables capabilities and access to data in a cloud hosting environment is actually going to play in the Army's evolution from a multi-domain operations focus to leveraging multi-domain operations in a joint all-domain environment, especially the command and control piece of that. And I think you've probably read a lot of senior leader discussion about the importance of our ability to fight and win. And what this is really about is our ability to compete below the level of armed conflict. Posturing ourselves to fight and win in a multi-domain environment is a big piece of that. And if you indulge me just for a second, so there are really three tenets to multi-domain operations. As the Army actually wrote a concept for this, war gamed it, went through modeling and simulation, et cetera, for multi-domain operations, probably about 18 or so months ago. And so there are really three tenets to this, and I'll get to the point here. The first tenet is calibrated force posture, meaning you could actually get there. All right, you've got an organization and you can actually get there. That's the first tenet. The second tenet is actually multi-domain formations. The Army actually stood up the first ever multi-domain formation and multi-domain task force on the West Coast, oriented on the Pacific, about a year or so ago. So we actually have an organization. We have an organization, and we have an organization that can get there. But the point I'm making here is the third tenet that's really interesting and ties to the cloud discussion, and it's this idea of convergence. And in the context of this discussion, convergence is really, it's any sensor, it's any weapon system, and then any command and control node, regardless of where you are, access for them in near real time. Yeah. You cannot achieve those three tenets, especially the third tenet, which is all about convergence, unless you have your data has been properly curated, it's been migrated to a cloud hosting environment, and now you're able to leverage the power of other capabilities like artificial intelligence and machine learning to get back to what I talked about earlier, enabling your leaders, your warfighters, whether you're here in the Pentagon or at the tip of the spear, to orient, decide, and act faster than peer adversaries. So, as I said before, cloud is a means to an end, not the end itself. But we cannot achieve this idea, that third tenet of multi-domain operations, without really establishing this cloud hosted environment that Paul Puckett's been charged with delivering for the Army. And the last piece of that is resourcing. And so the Army is going to spend almost $800 million starting in 19 and through FY23. And it's all about, FY20 this year is about setting conditions, all right, and identifying what those specific priorities are that are related to this multi-domain environment, like sensor-to-shooter capability. And I know that you're aware that our number one modernization priority for the Army is long-range precision fires, right? And so cloud is critical. And migrating our data is critical to achieving those likely operational outcomes.
Awesome. Well, thank you for tying that all back to joint all-domain control and command and control, because that's something we hear about a lot in multi-domain operations. So I like to see that the cloud actually has an impact on the mission. Obviously, that's why you're here and your job. It makes all the difference. So I know we're coming close to time, but I do want to talk about another big project you're working on, or been working on for a couple of years now, Enterprise IT as a Service. I know you're working on some pilots there and have the groundwork laid, but I'd love to hear about progress that you've made and anything you can tell us about that.
Yeah, it's so the Army's got. I like to start with the why of Enterprise IT as a Service. So the Army's got 288 post camps and stations around the world. And a little over a year ago, as John Fogarty and I started having conversations about a hard right turn, all right, essentially we assessed that it would take us 25 years to fully modernize 288 post camps and stations around the world. So a hard right turn, a fundamental change in our thinking and our philosophy and our approach to modernization was required. And so we were having some conversations with our joint partners. As you know, the Navy for 25 years has been dipping their toe into the waters of as a service models. The Army had recently stood up Futures Command and was really, really focused on modernization and innovating at speed. And so General Fogarty and I started thinking about what's our contribution to that going to be? And how do we leverage this environment that's focused on modernization, almost a fundamental change in culture inside the Army, to change direction? And so what we decided to do was to dip our toe into the waters of as a service models at scale, not just a particular application here and there, but at scale against this particular problem set. Again, with the problem being we couldn't get there from here at 288 post-Campton stations. And so let's allow industry to come in and prove to us that they can provide as good or better capability at our post-Campton station, as good or better security than what we have now using a fundamentally different model. So where are we now? I think you're aware that the first pilot location was Army Futures Command in Austin, Texas, the headquarters there. And Microsoft actually won that contract. And then we had two other locations that we decided to actually pilot, where Verizon won one contract and AT&T actually won the other. And so what I tell people about enterprise IT as a service is enterprise IT as a service is bigger than enterprise IT as a service because of the lessons that we're actually learning from having gone through the actual process. Yeah. And so the intent is to do 3 per year for the next 3 years. And then we come back to the Army with a recommendation on whether or not we go forward with this particular model. So I think we're in fundamentally a good place. As a matter of fact, I'd argue that we're in a better place than we've ever been because we've got a live, almost petri dish to learn from. And as you well know, the Army is really good about getting campaigns of learning going to inform the future.
Great. I think I have one last question for you, and it's a little bit it's off script, but I think it'll lighten both of our days. I've heard you're a Steelers fan. I want to get your take. Football season, it sounds like it might happen. We heard that some of the facilities are opening this week. What do you think about the Steelers in the fall if football happens?
I'm thinking Super Bowl or bust. I've been a Steelers fan since I was in the 4th grade, and I had a really cool opportunity. This one will go to the grave with me. But back in November, during Military Appreciation Month, near Veterans Day, I had the opportunity to actually go to Pittsburgh and enlist about 63 local citizens into the military, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, on the field about 10 minutes before kickoff at Heinz Field. And so it was probably one of the coolest things that I've ever had the opportunity to do. And so, in terms of your question, I'm thinking Super Bowl or bust here. And I know you're a Packers fan, and as soon as I saw that, I thought back to the Super Bowl of a few years ago, and I'm like, do I really want to interview with this guy? Okay, all right, I'm over it. All right. But I'm thinking with that defense and getting Big Ben back, haircut and all, I think we're in a good place.
Good. Well, I'd love to see a rematch of 2010. But hopefully, either way, we'll get some football. I'm going crazy without it. So. But other than that, I appreciate your time, Lieutenant General Bruce Crawford. Thank you so much. I hope you and your family are staying safe. And I appreciate all that you do to keep the nation safe by providing technology to the Army. And we'll leave it at that. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd like to, again, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you for a few minutes here today about what the Army's doing and, what we've learned, lessons we've learned in the COVID environment. One thing I'd like to come back and talk to you about is an idea that we've got going, and I think it's kind of a big idea as we assess that the center of gravity for everything that you and I have talked about is actually people.
Yeah.
All right. And so we've got an effort ongoing called Quantum Leap. And it's essentially taking a step back and acknowledging the fact that only about 40% of the current tech workforce, I talked about those 15,000 IT professionals that we have throughout the Army, only about 40% have the resident skills that we're going to need in the next, I'd say, 3 to 5 years as we move towards the modernized Army of 2028. And so the fundamental thesis is the world has changed and so should we, specifically looking at and assessing the world of academia and the acceptance of online training and nano degrees by having to send someone away for 2 years and bringing them back. And how do we leverage that changing environment in academia to be able to scale quickly the skill sets that we're going to need in the next 3 to 5 years? And so it's a pretty interesting concept leveraging investments from venture capitalists to some of our big defense contractors in this idea of online training. And again, it's about fundamental premise is moving away from a focus on certifications to a focus on the skills, the fundamental skills that we're going to need to move the Army from the industrial age to the information age. So at some point, I would really like to come back and have a conversation with you about people, as people are the priority for the Army.
Absolutely. That's great. And that's something we found in talking to other people. We can't do this without the people. It's not as much about the technology, it's about the people. So that's a great way to end it. Again, General Crawford, thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Army strong.
Army strong. Great. Thank you.